And we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Nilly Gull, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live session. Today, I am joined by Brett Cowan, the CEO of Payroll Experts Australia. Hello, Brett. Welcome.
Hi, Neely. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's lovely to have you here, Brett. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you've got a very busy schedule, and I know that we've been speaking about running this session for a very long time. We've made a few attempts at it, but we didn't quite get there. But here we are today. So thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
So today we're talking about the Queensland Health Payroll Implementation Debacle is the word that that I've used to name this, and I think that's probably the best word that describes it. Brett will share with us today his experience with the Queensland Health payroll failure, how he ended up getting involved in the whole project. But I think just to sort of start off, Brett, if it's okay with you, I'll give a brief overview of sort of the whole project, what happened, and then we can jump into it. Is that okay?
Sure, please.
Great, okay. So for those of you who aren't aware, in 2010, the Queensland Health Department launched or tried to launch a new payroll system, but it very, very quickly became infamous for its huge failures. And unfortunately, those failures led to a lot of issues, both financially, both in terms of reputation, but more importantly, it led to some huge issues for the employees because people weren't paid properly or weren't paid at all. And obviously you can imagine the impact that would have had on them and their families. So the project, I think, was sort of set to cost about $6.19 million, but it then sort of skyrocketed to over $1 billion, and I think it maybe increased even more from there. But we'll find out about all of those details in a moment. So just to hit you off, to start off the program, Brett, first of all, can you describe what your role and responsibilities were during the Queensland Health payroll system implementation?
Sure. I was a contractor. I was engaged for the last 12 months of the user acceptance test as the UAT manager, so the user acceptance test manager. So in that role, my responsibility was to run a team. It was about 40 people where we were testing, validating the correctness and the robustness of the solution to make sure that once it went live and started paying people that it would actually work and that people would be paid correctly. So ultimately, the final quality gate before go live for the entire system.
Okay, great. And just for our viewers, and I actually hope I've done this correctly, and I'm pretty sure we are live. But if we do want this to be as interactive as possible, so please feel free to write any questions in the chat, and Brett will be more than happy to answer them.
Mm-hmm.
So just moving along to our to the next question. So in terms of the initial goals and expectations for the new payroll system, what were they? What were the new goals and expectations? What were they hoping to achieve out of this?
At the time, Queensland Health had a very large payroll team, and the objective was to make it much more efficient. So to reduce cost of running the payroll by automating a lot within the solution that they were implementing, and therefore potentially to be able to sort of repurpose those people into other roles within the organisation. That was the main goal of it. There was obviously many manual processes being run. It's a very complex environment, as you can imagine. Health is a massive organisation with many different roles, and as a result, there was a lot of manual work being done to work around the incumbent system, and so it was needed to bring in a better solution to automate it and to therefore get better consistency and to get faster speed.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And just to again get sort of our viewers a little bit more involved, if you don't have any questions, please also just write in the chat sort of where you're joining us from today as well, so that we can see, you know, the greater community and where everybody's from. So that'll be fantastic. So those were the goals and the expectations. Obviously, that wasn't achieved, which then resulted in an inquiry afterwards. So can you just give us an overview of the public inquiry that was conducted? And I mean, well, I suppose who initiated the inquiry and what were the inquiry's objectives?
Sure. So the government that had run the payroll system implementation, or under which the implementation had been run, was a Liberal government. And of course, with a change of government, suddenly someone needed to be held to account. And so I think it was the Labor government thereafter then ran this inquiry. I'm not sure about the party politics, but ultimately it was something like that. And what then happened, so it was a parliamentary inquiry. It was headed by an ex-High Court judge called Richard Chesterman, and he was a fabulous, sharp as a tack guy, sitting at the head of the inquiry, and he had brought in some very sharp solicitors to support in the assembly of an analysis of all of the data. And I spent maybe a good 10 days with those people, sort of helping run through exactly what had happened. And they'd subpoenaed all of the data that I still had from that project, so they could actually leverage that in their investigation. And the focus of it was truly to understand what went wrong and how to stop this happening again. So it was they spent about $5 million on the inquiry itself, but no better example of money well spent to read the final report, which is still available online, and to actually see the in detail breakdown of how a project of this size went so badly wrong. It's just written there in black and white. It's brilliantly done.
Yeah, and I've actually read that report. It's I mean, it's a brilliant report because it really goes through all the details and everything that sort of went on. But when you sort of start reading the details of what happened and all of the oversight, which was just in plain sight, it's amazing. So I highly recommend it if you've got some time to read the report of the inquiry into the Queensland Health payroll failure. So we know the report was there to identify sort of what happened, why it happened, etc. And if we sort of take it back to your involvement and what you sort of did during that project, when did you first realise that there were problems with the payroll system implementation?
Probably before I started, realistically, because I'd been told that the UAT had been running for 6 months and they expected the contract to go for 12 months before I started. And so I rocked up, and the fact that a UAT had been running already for 12 months, for 6 months before I turned up, was already a massive alarm bell. And the fact that they expected the UAT to actually run in fully for 18 months brings a massive amount of risk to any project. You cannot have a bunch of changes happening to a system whilst it's in UAT. And that was already a massive red flag. Also, when I turned up on my first day, and I had a conversation with effectively the heads of the department from Queensland Health, and they were very clear about their concerns with the project and how it was running, and the fact that they felt that they weren't able to capture control of it themselves, and that they were putting that task on to me to actually make sure that I was holding the line with regards to Queensland Health's objectives, which were to go live with a great system that would pay people correctly, as opposed to necessarily the vendors or SI's focus as it appeared to be in the way that they were executing the project.
Yeah. Todd's just given us some feedback here in terms of who was in power at the time. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I couldn't remember which one. I just knew there was a change of government. Appreciate that.
So, so during that time, then, Brett, what do you think were some of the key issues or challenges that were encountered during the time that you were there? Sort of what you saw, I suppose, what you observed.
I think, to put it really simply, the system as delivered to the user acceptance test wasn't ready. The systems integrator had not spent enough effort to define the actual business processes of the client, which would then have led down into the technical specification of the solution, because it wasn't an out-of-the-box solution. It wasn't just a configuration. It was an integration between WorkBrain, Canadian time and attendance system, and SAP, which was the actual payroll system itself. And they were trying to actually code this integration. And because they hadn't first analyzed the business processes, they were creating a tool that may or may not have actually delivered what Queensland Health needed. But more importantly, even had they built the wrong tool, they still had not actually made it robust. They still had not debugged it completely. So when we started to execute user acceptance testing, the system would simply crash. It would actually crash and leave it with a terminal sign on the operator's terminals. It would not actually crash gracefully. And so if you are a user acceptance tester and the system just dies on you, you can't do anything with that. So that was a massive, massive problem. And it really was at the end of the day, it meant that we couldn't really progress much with user acceptance testing because the system wasn't stable enough to do so. So throughout the course of my tenure there, I kept issuing formal memos back to the project and the entity, Queensland Health itself, saying this system is not ready for user acceptance testing. You have to stop the project, go back, insist that the vendor actually builds the solution and has it fully tested before it gets to UAT. So we can actually focus on validating the business process through the testing, as opposed to tripping over functional issues throughout the execution of our tests. So that was by and large the largest, call it day-to-day problem. But if you actually take it back, why was it so hard to get traction in this space? It was a three-way contract. It was a contract from Queensland Health to CorpTech, and then from CorpTech to the SI and the vendor. And that meant that anytime Queensland Health really tried to force an issue with the vendor or the SI, it meant that CorpTech needed to be involved. And that made it incredibly difficult for Queensland Health as an entity to control the narrative and to control the progress of the project. And so it was like Queensland Health was trying to fight with one hand tied behind its back, and it proved very, very difficult for them in that situation.
Okay. Just before we move on to the next question, I think David's made a comment. So thanks for that, David. Put that up there for a bit. So that then, I suppose, leads into our next question very well. How would you describe the level of government oversight in the project?
Well, Queensland Health had implemented, and I don't know if it was, by the time I'd gotten there, it had been already set up, but that had implemented normal project management governance frameworks. They had a project directorate, they had a change management board, they had a risk management board, they had all sorts of governance bodies in place. But the challenge with it was that they weren't actually able to communicate effectively beyond the project the risks that were being found. There had been a myth generated and actually really bought into by the project that the incumbent system, the lattice system, was about to crash. Now, this is documented in the report. So that the system was about to crash. Oh my God, one more pay run and the whole thing might collapse. So we have to get this thing live. We have to get this thing live. We can't delay. So no matter how many issues we kept raising and highlighting the challenge with it, there was this imperative that we still have to hit this date, and that the organization would do anything to achieve that. A lot of the time in these sorts of projects, it's important to be able to cope with certain things going wrong. Any project will have challenges along the way, but it really needs to be accepted that if you have over 1,000 defects outstanding, then that probably tells you a bigger picture story as opposed to just that we have a lot of defects. If you have that many issues, it probably does talk to that there is something intrinsically wrong systemically with the project as it currently stands. And it seemed that no matter how much we tried to communicate that there were greater forces at play that meant, no, we have to keep going. So I know for me, myself, I reached out to internal audit at Queensland Health to actually ask them to come and investigate internally to try and stop. I could point them to where all the issues would be and they would be able to do something about it. But unfortunately, in the structure of Queensland Health at the time, this was not inside their scope of that they were focused on. So as a result, whilst they accepted that I was saying that this is going to end badly, they felt that there was nothing they could do within their powers.
Yeah. So with all of that knowledge in mind, and just sort of going back to the contract setup, would it be fair to say, in terms of the root causes of the failure, would the contract setup be at the very top of that?
Oh, look, every legal engagement commercially between two organisations, the success or not definitely starts with the contract, 100%. As an example, there was that whole tripartite partner arrangement of that contract that was already massively problematic. But equally, there were things, or there were missing things in the contract that meant that as the UAT manager, I was not allowed to ask for the system testing cases or system test results from the vendor. And that proved massively problematic when I kept running into issues in UAT, which were functional issues, meaning they should have been picked up in an earlier phase of testing. When I wasn't able to get in and understand why this was happening, that the vendor just gave us well, when I say the vendor, probably the SI in this case, just gave us no, in the contract, that's not in the contract that you're allowed to do that. So no, you cannot ask for that. And no, we will not show you. It really limited my ability to make meaningful progress. It was like it was in a black box. Things were being thrown at me and I just had to deal with them. And I was finding lots of issues, but I couldn't help trace back the issues to their source. So these are the sorts of things that a contract needs to have to facilitate a true partnership when you're getting to this nasty pointy end of the project. The contract has to create an environment where both parties are dependent upon each other, not one party being more powerful than the other. And unfortunately, in the way that that contract was created, it appeared to be that certainly the SI had much of the power, and that the client, in this case, Queensland Health, though via Corptech, was much more subservient and was effectively tasked with doing some things, as in the user acceptance test, and needing to respond to the vendor or the SI, but not necessarily having any authority over the SI to demand things back. And so it really felt like inside the project at the time, it really felt like we were just kept rolling with the punches because that's all we could do to just get to the end date.
Yeah. So I suppose in terms of the relationship between Queensland Health and the vendors, obviously it was a very complicated one then.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, there were many personal friendships that existed between all different people, as you find. It shouldn't ever be a personal thing where these challenges hit people. I know for myself, I'm still very good friends with the test manager on the other side in the SI. We remain in contact, and I have utmost respect for him. But obviously, within the roles that we were playing for inside that project, there were certain demands placed on each of us that we needed to behave in a certain way. But the experience of the vendor and how it treated its client Looking at it from an external perspective, I was just a contractor. I was quite disappointed with what I saw, and no relationship should look like that in this sort of situation.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So if we go back to sort of the accountability of this, how was that assigned for the problems? I mean, at certain points, you know, they were made aware, everyone was made aware that this issue had arisen, that issue had arisen. How did and bearing in mind sort of, you know, how the contract set up and the relationship between Queensland Health and the vendors, how was that accountability assigned to each issue that came about?
Yeah, well, it was just your standard defect management meeting. So every day we'd have a triage meeting where we'd walk through the sometimes 50 defects that had been found the day before, and we would triage each of them. And obviously there was much conversation about whether it was really a defect or a change request, or, you know, the usual sorts of things that happen. But one of the key takeaways for that, and you know, some organisations are very good at doing it, but some aren't, is to make sure that you have very clear definition of severity and priority for any of the defects that pop up. So you get that really sometimes, and it's very effective to have that actually in a contract itself, because as long as it's in the contract, then you can actually hold people to account. As soon as it becomes out of the contract, a normal gotcha in these sorts of things is the contract must be signed off and agreed by all parties, or not the contract, the test plan must be signed off and agreed by all parties. Well, yeah, but what happens if one of the parties doesn't want to agree to it? Then you get left in this no man's land of a thing being designed by a committee. And as a result, you end up with the worst possible test plan in the world. No, it's really important that the client owns the test plan. The client owns the definition of severity. All of those things must be from a client-centric perspective. It's great that the compromises can be reached, because ultimately it's really the client's benefit to have the system go live. That is absolutely critical. But the idea that there is a mutual agreement between both parties, being the SI and the client, of the severity of a defect is a path to hell, because you will just end up with a disagreement. And then what do? There always has to be an anointed party that says, I define the severity of the bug. You can talk to me about it. I can come to a compromise, that's true. But at the end of the day, I'm the one that defines what's going to impact my end users, not the vendor.
Right. Now, I kind of lost connection a little bit there. I don't know if you noticed. I don't know what happened, but we've got a question here from Ian Ross. Can you see that on the screen, Brett? Or do you want me to read it out?
Was it tempting to end your contract before the train crashed? Oh my goodness, yes, Ian, it was. Obviously, I was starting work at 7:30 a.m. and finishing at about 10 p.m. and every day I'd turn up at 7:30. There would be this massive email from one of the partners of the SI telling me how wrong I was and how it was awful. Personally, it was just awful. But what I felt was important was to have consistency in the ability to trace the history of this. If I had left somewhere in that 12 months, so much history would have been lost, and we would be none the wiser as to actually what had happened. And I felt it was my commitment, as masochistic as I am, to sit there and stay the course and to get to the end of the whole thing. Because I did, at the end of the project, I actually had that laptop that I'd been using throughout the entire project. I just placed that on my shelf. I bought a new laptop and I left that thing sitting there. And surprise, surprise, 2.5 years later, I received a phone call saying, do you want to take part in this inquiry? To which I then said, sure, here's the laptop with everything you need to know about it. And that, if I had not stayed, I could not have done that. And it would have made the inquiry so much less valuable, because it would have made it so hard for them to actually find all of the information that I knew. So I was very proud and very happy to have spent that much time with them. It was a pleasure. It really was a pleasure to work with them, to see how quickly they picked up on the challenges and understood what the ramifications of certain decisions were. and to see that final report come out and to have taken part in the cross-examination inside the inquiry was a tremendous experience. It wasn't scary. It was empowering because I knew my subject. I was able to deal with all of the challenging questions, and it really was a vindication of the work that I'd done.
And just a very quick question there. Do you still have that laptop?
No, I don't. I don't need it anymore.
Although maybe you framed it and, put it aside, or put, Brett Cowan's memorabilia from the inquiry.
No.
So just to move along to the outcomes, what was the state of the whole project at the end of the UAT?
So at the end of the user acceptance test, if I recall, there were something like, don't quote me on it, but there was something like 112 severity 1 and 2 defects still outstanding. That's a lot of severity 1 and 2s. That's not total bugs, that's severity 1 and 2s. And we had spent, and when I say outstanding, I mean that were not actually, that were still bugs. We had to manage them. We had to do the usual thing of saying, okay, we won't be able to exit UAT unless we have managed these bugs with workarounds or something like that, and therefore be able to reduce their severity. But these things were there. They were problems, they were issues, and the project worked so hard to be able to jump over the thresholds as described in the test plan that enabled us to exit UAT. This no doubt created a massive amount of work on all of the payroll people who had been a part of the project, but then who would pick it up in BAU. And that was a massive risk for the organisation as well, that all of these workarounds, 1, you can deal with, 2, you can deal with. Once it gets to 30 or 40 workarounds, not only is that a massive amount of work, there's a massive amount of risk of problems injecting themselves into the whole process, etc. That was the terrible state that we were in. However, again, coming back to the situation of having to go live because of the incumbent system going to crash. That myth was still there, and it was driving the decision making well beyond where it should have been. But I was involved in most of those meetings, but obviously there were a lot that I wasn't involved in. And so, it's the report can talk to the detail of all the politics and all sorts of things that were happening in there. And no doubt, I don't think, I'm certain that it was not a conscious decision to try and make a wrong decision, or it really was that people got caught up in things that maybe weren't as factual as they might have been, but they thought they were. And so decision was being driven that way. The long and the short of it, I think if you came down to it, was after I'd given 4 formal memos, again, me as the UAT manager, the one responsible for communicating the state of quality of this system before go live. That is what they had engaged me to do. And at the time I'd had 15 years of software testing experience with some of the biggest companies in the world. I knew my stuff. And for me to be saying to them, this is crazy, you have to stop and go back. When my final report said, you should stop and go back. But if you're not going to, you might as well go forward, because we are wasting so much money by running the UAT, and we're not finding UAT bugs, we're finding functional bugs. Our testing is not designed to track this stuff down. We are tripping over things. It's like you're in a dark room and you keep tripping over things that are on the floor and wondering, well, maybe I've tripped over the last one, but it's dark. You can't see, you have no clue what's going on, because your job is to just walk around the room and make sure that you can walk. That's what UAT is. And every time you trip over something, it's, oh, actually that's a problem. So functional testing is supposed to clear the bodies in the room. And UAT is just an acceptance test to say, hey, yeah, the bodies are all gone. And I know that I can feel the 4 walls. I can walk around all 4 walls. Excellent, we're right to go. And that's where we were left with, that we had tripped over all these bodies. We felt that we might have tripped over some of them. We knew that there were others. in the inquiry, I extrapolated out that said we'd probably only found 20% of the bugs, because our testing had only focused on the key things that we needed to do for UAT. There was so much more testing that needed to be done for functional testing that would have found actually all those other bugs, but that wasn't in the scope of UAT.
So with the functional testing then, Brett, I'm assuming that they would have completed the functional testing, signed off on it somehow, and then obviously moved on to the UAT. But when you went back to them and let them know, hey, the issue isn't here, the issue is in the functionality testing, so you need to go back. What was the response that you got? I mean, was it very clear cut? No, there's nothing wrong with that side, or
no,
just move on?
The statement wasn't there was nothing wrong. The statement was, again, this is where it comes down to contract. Brett, the system testing has been signed off. We will not talk about that again. We are now in UAT. And that was the hard and fast statement from the SI. That is all that they would ever say when I asked to have anything to do with system testing. Can I see the test cases so I have a view of the coverage that you've got, why this keeps happening? Again, my focus was on getting a better outcome. The SI's focus was on getting through the stages of the project so they could get sign-off so that the project is done from their perspective. And this is a really key takeaway to the whole thing, is truly what was the biggest lessons learned for me out of this whole process was that what the SI/vendor, their definition of success is very different to the definition of success for the actual client. The organization that is implementing this solution and getting the solution to run for their people, to pay their people, has a definition of success, which is something like that the system is easy to use, that it's cheap to maintain, that the payroll people love using it, that the people love entering their timesheets in it. It's really smooth and almost fully automatic, that our people just love it. And they come in and it's the easiest job in the world to run pay with it because it supports our payroll people so well. That is the client's definition of success. The SI's definition of success is to get the UAT signed off so that they can close out the project, it goes live, and then the vendor, maybe the SI, I don't know who, but can start making money out of licensing. And if that involves having a happy enough customer that they're willing to sign off, then awesome. That is definitely a part of it. But don't confuse that facet of it, which is a vehicle to get to success, for the definition of success itself. The definition of success of the two parties is very different, and Queensland Health did not understand that. And so they relied very heavily initially on the project management expertise of the SI to make it successful for them. And of course, only towards the end of the project did they start to realize, well, what we want is this, and they're pushing for that. And there's not necessarily a connection for us.
We've got a question here from David. Can you see that, Brett?
Oh, yeah. So what out of those 102 outstanding issues, what portion could have been avoided by vendor testing? You mentioned earlier, and what was just simple, not best fit for Queensland Health? That's a great question, David. I think that, again, from memory, I'm going to go 70% were functional issues. 70% of those 102 were things that should have been picked up in system testing, should have been fixed. Now, sometimes the fixing of those things creates a different sort of issue where now it doesn't work for our process as the client. That's possible, but we never got to that, so I can't give an estimate about that. But yeah, it was a significant number of those issues. And always what happens in this situation when you are finding so many, like thousands of bugs, the amount of effort that you need to expend to execute testing is massive as well. You overrun your time, you overrun your people are exhausted, because in order to raise a defect can take 20 minutes to actually document it all up so the developers or whatever can understand how to fix it. And you might have an estimate that maybe you'll create 20 bugs a day or something like that. And you factor that into your effort estimates for the testing. But if you're finding 50, your entire test plan goes out the window because you just haven't factored in that much effort to be available. So all of these things are key issues with finding that many bugs in a UAT.
Thanks for that question, David. So I just want to sort of ask you, this might not be, I suppose, exactly how it happened, but at what point did the system actually go kaboom? What point did it just sort of go, right, that's it, I'm not working?
Okay. Well, you mean after go live or in testing?
Well, first in testing and then go live, because I think it was 2 points really.
UAT4. So we did 4 rounds of UAT. And again, let me make it really clear. A UAT in any system should last no more than 2 weeks. In anything, be it payroll, be it anything. User acceptance testing should not last more than 2 weeks. The reason for that is that it is acceptance testing. It is not meant to find issues. If you're trying to find issues, take it back earlier. Do it in functional testing. Do it even what we subsequently called business process testing, because you want to communicate to your project people and to your sponsors and to everyone else in this business process testing. I expect to find some challenges. I expect to find issues, because UAT is as much about confidence in the system as it is about actually verifying that it's going to work. Confidence is really key for a stakeholder, a sponsor, to say, yes, let's go live. So before you get to UAT, create a phase of testing called business process testing, or whatever you want to call it, end-to-end testing. And that is where you're expecting to find issues. Then you say, okay, done. And now you start your UAT. The key with having UAT only at 2 weeks is because you need to hold back the tide of changes from production that by definition need to be kept dropping into your environment so that you have a system that's going to work when it goes live. So you can generally hold back 2 weeks of changes. But if you're getting into months of changes from production that are coming in, be it for Fair Work changes, be it, and when you've got a system that supports, let's go, 50 awards, you've got a lot of changes coming in from Fair Work every week. So you can hold back 2 weeks, get your UAT done in 2 weeks, have all your previous testing done, knowing that the thing's going to work. Now UAT is 2 weeks. It's going to be successful because you basically tested everything, and now it's just acceptance of the system. So to answer your question, because we had 18 months, which I was there for the last 12 months, we had 4 phases of testing. I think I came in for phase 2, 3, and 4. Phase 4 of UAT, we hit the button to start and go live. Within 5 minutes, we'd had 3 severity 1 issues. Within 5 minutes of kicking off the pay run. And this is not little things. This is big stuff. Core dumping, system going, I have no idea where I am, data in an unknown state. That is the sort of state that this system was in before they said we should go live. And no matter what I said, I couldn't convince them otherwise. Then take it to production. Now, I wasn't there when the first production run. My contract finished at the end of the UAT, and so I'd done my report, everything. I fought my fight. I'd done everything that I could to stop it. They made the decision to go live, and it was like, okay, I've done what I can. Once they went live, I understand that I think the first pay run worked. Then the second pay run, where you started to get retrospective payments coming in, it started to go a bit wild. And then the third one, which was retrospective payments on retrospective payments, where the whole thing just collapsed. And that it really just did stop. That's where people, I think there was a person that got paid like $400,000 for a fortnight's work. And there were many, many others who got paid $0 for a fortnight's work. So it was truly a disaster.
Wow. And understanding the magnitude of this problem and sort of how the effects go, well, they go, I suppose they grow and grow and grow, don't they? How do you think this experience has influenced the approach to technology within the payroll industry in general, but also within public service? Because I think things obviously operate a little bit differently in the public service, as they do, differently in the private sector. But what were the effects for both payroll in general and the public sector?
It certainly created a lot of consternation for people running projects. In Queensland still, they still refer to it as let's not be another Queensland Health payroll project. And that's been both good and bad. It's been good in the sense that, people are aware of the risks that they're taking and, know that they have to bring governance and be very aware of challenges and risk. The downside of it is, of course, they're overly cautious and it slows everything down. And because they're nervous and they don't necessarily understand, they haven't taken the time to understand the root causes and therefore to understand how to see the warning signs and to then avoid them, they create overly cautious and overly pessimistic plans. And that's not good for anyone either. So, there was a great report that people should read because after this health project, I subsequently became an expert witness, and I've done some expert witness on similar sorts of cases. And I can tell you that what's in that report from the Queensland Health thing written by those solicitors is pretty much a cookie cutter approach for how most projects fail. And if you simply read that and absorbed it and truly kept that knowledge, those lessons learned from that report in your head, most of the issues that you see in projects, big projects, implementation, configuration projects, most of the issues that might come your way are covered in that report, and how you might actually deal with them. That, to me, it is a brilliantly written report. It sounds boring, but it's actually like a novel. It's really cool.
That's true. And when we first spoke about this topic, and you told me to read the report, my my initial response was, "Oh my God, an inquiry report."
Yes, it
but
was. Yes,
I took your advice and I read it. It is actually like a novel. It is. It very clearly outlines what happened, how it happened, why it happened, what shouldn't have happened. So yeah, just to go on the back of what you were saying, Brett, it definitely is a great, I suppose, what not to do in a payroll implementation sort of manual, really. You could call it like an instructions guide.
Well, I mean, almost any project, but yes, specifically payroll, but
yes.
A lot of the themes cross over outside of payroll.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think, or have you actually sort of ever come across, after sort of this all happened, after the inquiry, have you ever come across any projects where people have gone, now guys, the Queensland Health project was a big failure, we don't want this to be the same thing, so this is, have you ever heard people sort of reference that and make sure that their project is operating better?
Certainly every government project in Queensland, wow. Yes, definitely.
So, so it's used as a guide, as a basis of, what not to do.
But having said that, most of the people in saying that have not necessarily read the report too. And this is what I mean by being overly cautious.
Yeah.
That you know that there's a bad thing there and you do your best to avoid the bad thing. But if you actually understand the bad thing, then maybe you understand it's not all bad, that there's fantastic learnings to take away from it. And so the idea of setting the contract up properly, what needed to be in that contract, you get those things and you're proactive at driving these changes into your project, as opposed to just saying, oh my God, it's all risky, just be very careful. That's not necessarily helpful. Really proactively taking those lessons learned and implementing the fixes for those challenges is actually the way forward. And as most people who've worked in government would know, it's one of the biggest challenges for government work is the pace at which it's implemented. And it shouldn't be that way, right? There's no real, call it, technical need for it to be that way. It should be that our governments are the center of innovation. But the problem is, with all of the structures around it, it can be very hard to effectively isolate risk and be able to communicate how you're managing it. And so I think better distribution and understanding of something like that inquiry report would help massively for our government implementations to be not only less risky, but also more proactive and faster and better.
Yeah. And what advice would you give, Brett, to other organisations who are undertaking large-scale initiatives? What would be your advice to them?
Look, firstly, get a great team. The people who make up your team are going to be the people who make it successful or not. That means the team structure properly with a sponsor, and a sponsor is identified as the most likely component of the success of a project. If you've got a great sponsor who understands their role, they can pretty much make everything work. The team needs to know what they're doing, but don't think that you need to get that skill and that capability from internally. You want certainly to have some internals in that team, but you also definitely want to have some external voices in there to bring outside views to support you in terms of delivering a great outcome. The other sort of thing is make sure you always remember your definition of success, right? So many times projects get confounded by, oh, look, but this little payroll rule here isn't working. We can't go live. It's like, well, hang on a sec. Your definition of success was to go live by this date, to be off this system by this date. If there's a little payroll rule that isn't kicking it off for you, that's not part of your definition of success. You can make a workaround. You can do any sorts of different fixes for that little issue so that you remember and you achieve your definition of success. So please try and always keep front and center your definition of success. And when it comes to any sort of system that is a business-centric system, and in this context, payroll is a massively business-centric system. It's really at the heart of any company. There's no company that exists that has employees that doesn't have a payroll team of some sort. So it's at the center of any company. And you have to think about your business processes first. Don't get distracted by the shiny tech, because it'll always look cool and, oh, isn't that really, oh my God, he pressed a button and look at all the colors. It's so cool. Don't be distracted by that. That's probably not going to help your business do business. So forget about the tech at the start. Forget about even your requirements at the start, because requirements tend to be jaded by other people's experiences, maybe in other companies and all that sort of stuff. Start with your business process. Understand deeply what your business process is, and then start deriving requirements, and then start looking at systems that achieve those requirements. But don't start with tech, don't start with requirements, start with understanding your business first in the context of payroll, and as we're talking. But if you get that and use that as your core, then it's easy when a system doesn't tick off a couple of requirements, but it's the best system, then that's the one you want to buy. You can easily trace that back to your business process and say, which parts of my business process are going to be affected because the system that I want to buy doesn't have this functionality? It's that part of it. Well, that's okay. We can work around that, because workarounds are a business process thing. They're not a technical thing, because it's going to be your payroll people that are going to have to do the workarounds. So you need to understand how those workarounds fit within all of the other processes that they have to run at that most critical time when they're running pay runs. So they would be my three most important things.
We've got another great question here from David. Do you think stakeholders have become more open or less open to warnings from within project team as a result?
It depends on their maturity, David. I think that, again, this is where it comes down to having exactly the right sponsor. If you have a sponsor who truly understands their role as a sponsor, they know that there are many, many things, and that their job is to remove obstacles within the way of the project getting a successful outcome within the organization. That's the sponsor's role. And within the implementation of a project, all the stakeholders within the project directorate or the steerco, whatever it might be, effectively in that role, they're supporting the sponsor. So the sponsor can almost fix any problem that the project finds itself with, be that by delaying the start date or whatever it might be. They have the power to do that. So as long as the stakeholders and the sponsor understand their roles, which often is not necessarily the case, but as long as they do, then then there's no reason why an example like the Queensland Health Payroll project should cause them concern. Again, leveraging it as a great place to get lessons learned, to look at how to avoid those issues, to be able to make sure that you have a successful project, is part of maybe what the project needs to be supporting the stakeholders with. But ultimately, it starts with the mindset of the stakeholders. That if they truly have the definition of success in mind, and that they truly buy into that is what we need to do for the organisation, they will always work a way around the challenges that the project is coming up with, and that the project manager, as a general rule, is proposing, here's 3 options for this challenge. Which way do you want to go? Okay, we'll tweak our definition of success to be like that, or whatever it might be. That's all of the way the stakeholders can actually achieve success for their company.
We're getting sort of getting close to time here, but just before we do, and before we get into the sort of key takeaways of the project failure, Brett, you being so heavily involved in this, and I can see that it's obviously sort of had quite a bit of an impact on you as well. I just want to ask you, how did this experience affect you, Brett Cowan, both personally and professionally?
Personally, I didn't get a lot of sleep for 12 months. It was a very, very, very tough project. I didn't have a lot of friends in the project. Both Queensland Health thought I was being too pedantic, and the vendor SI just that we were by definition on different sides of the ring, as it were. Which it shouldn't be that way. There's natural tension that should happen, but we should always be working together to the best outcome for the client. That's really how it should work. But personally, for afterwards, it was a great experience to then be part of the inquiry and all of those sorts of things. Really, it was such an amazing learning experience for me. I also learned a massive amount, in the context of the project and all of the things that I saw in there. Professionally, my name was mud after this thing went live. After the whole thing crashed, and I had on my CV that for the last 12 months, I was the UAT manager for this. It was incredibly difficult to not only find a contract, but to find any sort of job. And I know that many people who worked on that project have simply erased it from their CV. They just basically have maybe a fudge, or they just have a gap that they hope people don't see. I don't know. But after the inquiry report came out, where if you read that report, there's a lot of reference to the work that I did. And I found that my phone started to ring, because that was the vindication that I needed from an independent party, that I'd done everything that I possibly could have done to avoid this disaster. And the reality was that as a contractor, I only had so much power to stop things happening, which is why I then started my company, to be able to provide that same sort of service, but with a company behind it, full of people who have experience like this, that know what they're doing, so that we can avoid that sort of thing happening to other clients. But as a contractor, it was tough. It was really tough. And thankfully, I had some people who respected the work that I did, who knew in detail what had happened, and that were able to give me some work that I subsequently did. And then, as I said, once that report came out, the phone started to ring with regards to how you've proven that you can speak truth to power. You need to come in here and help us in this situation, because this is equally as messy. Now, I can promise you they're never as equally as messy as that was. But yes, there are some messy projects out there.
Well, I'm glad that there was obviously a positive result at the very end of, I suppose, the turbulence for you, Brett. So I suppose, good things can come out of some bad things. And just to sort of finish off, what do you think would be, or what would you say would be, I suppose, the top 3 takeaways from this, or from this session, I suppose?
I hope that people hear that there's always a choice, no matter how bad a project is running. you're always every day making decisions that can keep it running in a bad way or a good way. There's always compromises to be made, right? No project is ever perfect. There's always going to be challenges with every single implementation that comes along. And where I think many projects find themselves in challenging situations is when they don't recognize that some of their assumptions aren't necessarily still valid. They may have been valid when it was originally thought about, but over time, it must be realized that actually it's not a valid assumption anymore. So perpetually reassessing where you're at and why we're trying to target this. Our definition of success was to go live by this date. Really? I know that maybe 12 months ago we felt we needed to, but is it actually that still? Like, yes, it is. Okay, because the current system is end of life. We really need to. It's going to cost us $10 million to extend that end of life thing. Okay, so that is definitely our date. Great. So then where are we going to compromise? If it's not on the date, is it the quality? And whenever I say that when it comes to a payroll system, people go, oh my God, you can't compromise on quality of a payroll system. Yes, you can. Yes, you absolutely can. In a quality of a payroll system, a compromise means having manual workarounds. Compromise means potentially being able to say to people, hey, we need to overpay you a bit in the short term until we get this particular facet of the system sorted out, and then we'll rectify it going forward. We won't then try and claw that money back from you. That can be yours. But going forward, there's just some funky little thing of a rule that we can't seem to fix before go live. We will go extra for you in the short term so that in the future we can then come back. These are all, there's so many different ways to skin the cat. And as long as you remember what your definition of success is and you've validated that it's still true, you can always work a way around it. And obviously, you know, the reality is there's a lot of politics in many organizations, etc., which get in the way of that simple truth. I think it's up to the sponsor in those organizations to actually really keep coming back to that. Really, is this our definition of success? And why isn't this going to get us there? Let's keep coming back to that. That's the sponsor's role, to keep that in mind and to push for that to be verified and achieved no matter what.
Brett, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your insights. I think it's been a great learning session for everybody, and thanks to everybody who's joined us. And just to finish off, I think there's also another huge government sort of payroll implementation failure that happened in Canada a few years ago, that our CEO, Melanie Pitsey, has put together a podcast series of. I'll just pop that into the chat for you guys to have a look at when you have some time. It is really a great series of podcasts that you can watch, that you can listen to. And when you start listening to it, I think a lot of that will resonate with a lot of the things that Brett's been talking about today, and his own personal experience. So again, thank you so much, Brett. We've got some thank yous here. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great session. And if any of our viewers, if you have some more questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be sure to get them over to Brett and get them answered for you. So until next time, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.